Welcome back, Focus Learners. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for another explainer. Today, we are dissecting the legal mechanics of what actually happens when business promises are broken. I mean, we've all been there, right? Or at least we've heard the horror stories. Deals gone totally wrong, deadlines completely missed, agreements just shattered. But what exactly happens in the eyes of the law? Well, we are going to unpack the anatomy of a broken promise and break down some pretty dense legal concepts into crystal clear, actionable knowledge. Let's get started.
Okay, let's dive right in. Picture the ultimate oops moment in business law. When a contract breaks down, it's not just some minor inconvenience. It triggers a massive domino effect of legal and financial consequences. But the good news is, it's not just chaos. The law has a very structured, predictable way of handling this fallout. And understanding that structure, that gives you a huge advantage in literally any business dealing.
So, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll define when contracts break. Second, we'll compare anticipatory versus actual breaches. Third, we'll cover the remedies for a breach. Fourth, the different types of damages. And finally, we'll wrap up with prefix damages and penalties.
Starting right off with Section 1, when contracts are broken, let's define the core event here.
Fundamentally, a breach of contract is just an unfulfilled obligation. It means someone failed to do what they legally swore they would do. And this simple failure acts as the starting pistol for all the legal drama we're about to discuss. Without this initial failure, the contract just hums along perfectly. But the second this line is crossed, boom, the injured party immediately gains a right of action against the person who broke the promise.
Moving right along to Section 2, anticipatory versus actual breach. Basically, when does the broken promise actually happen?
Now, what's really interesting is this concept of an anticipatory breach. Under Section 39 of the Indian Contract Act, this happens before the time fixed for performance has even arrived. Think about it like this. You make a deal with someone on July 15th to supply 10 bales of cotton on August 14th. But plot twist, on July 30th, they explicitly tell you, yeah, I won't be able to supply that cotton. The due date isn't even here yet, but the promise is already broken. This can happen expressly through words or even impliedly through conduct. Like, say, agreeing to sell someone a horse next week, but then going ahead and selling it to someone else today. Crazy, but it happens.
So, when an anticipatory breach happens, the law doesn't just leave you hanging. It gives you a literal fork in the road, requiring some strategic business action. As the injured party, you are instantly excused from doing anything else, and you get two choices. Option 1, you treat the contract as completely rescinded right then and there, and you sue for damages immediately. You don't even wait for the due date. Option 2, you elect to keep the contract alive. You just wait until the actual due date and then hold them responsible. But honestly, be careful here. If you choose option 2, you are keeping the contract alive for both of you. That means if some supervening freak impossibility happens in the meantime that legally discharges the contract, the guilty party can actually use that to get off the hook.
Now, contrast that with an actual breach. This one is way more straightforward. It's simply a refusal to perform the promise on the scheduled date or during the performance itself. If you agree to deliver 100 bags of sugar on February 1st, and February 1st rolls around and no sugar, that is an actual breach. It happens right at the exact moment the performance was due.
So keeping this distinction starkly in mind, anticipatory breach happens before the clock runs out, whereas an actual breach happens precisely on the due date or right in the middle of performance, and that timing completely dictates your legal options.
Which brings us to Section 3, remedies for a breach. Basically, what solutions does the law offer?
If you're the injured party, you essentially have 5 legal avenues you can pursue. You can sue for damages, which is your standard financial compensation. You can rescind or cancel the contract. You can file a suit for specific performance, which means the court actually forces the breaking party to do exactly what they promised. You can seek an injunction to stop them from doing something, or you can sue upon quantum merit, which is essentially getting paid for the proportion of work you've already done. Now, for the rest of this explainer, we are going to zoom in specifically on the most common remedy, the suit for damages.
All right, Section 4, the types of damages. How exactly do we put a price tag on a broken promise under Section 73? The law essentially uses 6 different buckets to classify damages: ordinary, special, vindictive, nominal, damages for deterioration, and prefix damages. Think of this as your legal cheat sheet to prevent cognitive overload as we dive deep into what each of these means and exactly when they apply.
Let's start with the baseline standard, ordinary damages.
When a contract is broken, the injured party is entitled to compensation for any loss that naturally arose in the usual course of things from that breach. But here is the absolute kicker. Section 73 states that compensation is not given for remote or indirect loss. It has to be a direct, natural consequence.
To truly understand this boundary, you've got to know the most famous case law on this exact topic. Hadley versus Baxendale. It's a classic. Here's the story. These guys owned a flour mill, and their main crankshaft broke. They gave the broken shaft to a common carrier to deliver to a foundry to get a new one made. It was supposed to take 2 days. Well, the carrier delayed the delivery, and as a result, the mill sat completely idle for days. The owners sued not just for the shipping delay, but for the massive loss of profits from the entire mill being shut down. But the court, they said no. Why? Because the carrier was only told they were transporting a broken shaft. Nobody told them a delay would result in a total loss of profits for the entire business. That loss of profits was considered remote. It didn't naturally arise in the usual course of just shipping a part.
And that transitions us perfectly into special damages. If those mill owners had explicitly told the carrier, hey, if this is delayed, our whole mill shuts down and we lose a fortune, they absolutely could have claimed special damages. You see, special damages can only be claimed if a party receives prior notice of special circumstances. For instance, if you ship a machine component and you explicitly tell the carrier, I need this tomorrow without delay or I will lose a highly profitable government contract, and they delay it anyway, boom, you can sue for the lost profits. But without that prior notice, you are stuck with just plain old ordinary damages.
Okay, let's briefly touch on vindictive or exemplary damages. In business law, damages are almost always about compensating financial loss, not punishing people. But there are 2 highly specific traditional exceptions where courts will hit you with heavy damages for non-financial injury. The first is a breach of promise to marry, compensating for injury to feelings. The second is the wrongful dishonor of a customer's check by a banker. For a business person, having a check wrongfully bounced causes immense damage to your credit and reputation, and courts will award exemplary damages for that, even if no direct financial loss is proven right away.
Then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have nominal damages. We're talking 1 single rupee, maybe even just 10 paise. Why on earth would anyone sue for a rupee? Well, nominal damages are awarded when you've successfully proved a breach occurred, but you haven't actually suffered any real financial damage. The court awards this microscopic amount simply to establish the legal decree that a right was broken. It's the law's way of saying, yep, you are right, they broke the promise, but you didn't really lose any money over it.
Moving on to our final section, Section 5, Prefix Damages and Penalties. What happens when business partners try to guess the cost of a breach ahead of time?
English law makes a really sharp distinction between 2 concepts here. First, liquidated damages. This is when the parties make a genuine, reasonable pre-estimate of what a breach will likely cost. It's a fair assessment, meant to compensate, and the law likes this. On the other hand, you have a penalty. This is an arbitrary, unreasonably high amount written into the contract specifically to terrify the other party into performing. It's a threat, not a calculation. Under English law, penalty clauses are generally totally disregarded, and you can only recover your actual loss.
So, the crucial point is how Indian law handles this under Section 74. Let's say a contract boldly states a massive penalty of 100,000 rupees if a breach occurs. But when the breach actually happens, the real, proven loss is only 70,000 rupees. Under Section 74, the court is not going to blindly enforce that 100,000 rupee penalty. Instead, the aggrieved party is only entitled to receive a reasonable compensation not exceeding the amount named, so the court will award the actual reasonable loss of 70,000. You cannot use a massive prefixed penalty to secure a windfall profit off a broken promise.
Actually, scratch that, there is one quick, strict exception to this rule. If a person gives a bond to the central or state government for the performance of a public duty and they breach that condition, they are liable to pay the entire sum mentioned in the bond. The government does not have to sit there and prove actual damages. The full penalty amount is strictly enforced. No getting out of it.
Wow, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, from the initial failure to perform all the way to the precise calculations of Section 73 and 74. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If every broken business promise comes with a highly structured legal price tag, how carefully are you calculating the potential damages and giving the proper legal notices before you sign your name on your next contract? Knowledge is power, but in business law, it's also your protection. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.